What's up, everybody? How's it going? Let's go over to this screen. There we go. Cool. Happy Thursday. Hope you're all doing well. Let me shut off some audio here. Shut that one off. There we go. Cool. Hope you're doing well. Drop a hello in chat if you were hanging out tonight. Tonight we're gonna do Q&A. I've got a ton of questions. The more I answer, the more they roll in. That's awesome. Again, I'm just here to provide my perspectives and my thoughts on tech interview, career guidance, all that kind of stuff. So if you have questions, please drop them in chat. Creature Next, good to see you in chat. Hello. Yeah, if you got questions or commentary, I will absolutely work that into the stream. That's kind of my MO. Yeah, what else is going on with everybody? Hope you're all doing well. Got something cooking for Sunday. So we'll kick off Sunday's stream with something a little special that I'm working on. I'm just gonna turn this mic up a tiny bit. There we go. Cool. Let's dive in. So, been a busy couple of weeks, getting some material out there, getting some stuff done at work. Work's been busy this week. How am I doing? I'm tired today, but otherwise doing good. I've got a lot of questions to go through, and I'm trying to figure out how many I want to go through. There's definitely some questions that I want to spend a little more time on instead of like the 2 to 5 minute kind of answer that I would typically give on these Q&A questions. A couple of them tonight, I actually want to spend a little more time kind of digging in and unpacking a little bit more. So some of the answers will get a little longer. I am going to do my best to stay on topic though, because I do tend to stray a little bit as I go, and that's just something I recognize about myself, but it's all good. Yeah, I think that's pretty much where we'll get started on that. So yeah, if you're hanging out in chat, say hello. If you got questions as we go, you're welcome to do that. For those that are here for the first time, I'm Ian Douglas. I'm the guy that wrote the website techinterview.guide. You'll see that link like down in the very bottom down there. There we go, techinterview.guide. So you can check out the website. All my contact info is on there. My LinkedIn is on there. My Twitter's on there. You're welcome to connect with me on all the places. All these videos get recorded and put up on YouTube later on. Q&A sessions like this, I tend to kind of trim up a little bit and put into separate, smaller videos on YouTube. And I also extract all the audio, and that becomes the podcast. So we'll get all of that stuff sliced and diced later on tonight, and prepped and scheduled and all that kind of stuff. I think I got podcast episodes going through part of November, or most of November. Actually, most of November. YouTube, I'm going to start doing every other day. Over the past 2 months or so, I've been doing YouTube every single day, and the engagement's starting to go down a little bit. So I might do like every other day on YouTube as well. I might do like Monday, Wednesday. Trying to think every other day where I get a day off. Well, I have been doing like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I might do like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday or something like that. Just so I can get, I don't end up with a backlog where like tonight's Q&A doesn't end up, showing up on YouTube till like March. Because I think that some of this stuff is timely. Some of the questions that we're going to get to are going to be about like Q4 hiring and things like that. And it's already Q4. So kind of want to get into that stuff sooner than later. But yeah, if you've got questions, please drop them in chat. Or if you just want to like chat and say hello, you're welcome to do that too. So hi, Creature Next. Hope you're doing well. And the other thing I want to do is actually get some of the questions on the screen, so it's not just verbal. So we'll get going with those, and I will post those. You'll see them right under my video, or under my face, I guess, on the video. But yeah, drop stuff in chat if you've got questions along the way, and I'll definitely answer some of those. So you're hanging in there? Well, that's good to hear. Good stuff. All right, so in no particular order, I'm just going to start going through some of these questions. So one that I got submitted was, what are some of the pros and cons of working as a contractor versus working full-time? And this one's kind of an interesting one. I would say like early in your career, it's probably going to be a little bit harder to find contract work if you want to get into like full-time contracting. It's not impossible, but companies that want to hire a contractor are looking for an expert. Like, we had somebody come remodel our whole kitchen a couple of years back, And we wanted someone that knew what they were doing. We didn't want to just hire somebody that knew how to swing a hammer. Like, we wanted someone that could actually come in and do it properly. And it's going to be a very similar kind of thing with software development as well. If you get into contract work, people are going to view you as an expert. And this is where going into a consultancy job as an entry-level developer can feel a little bit high pressure, because you're going to be expected to be an expert on things. And as an entry-level dev, you may have a lot of knowledge about one thing, but as a consultant, they may expect that you're kind of like a general contractor sort of thing when it comes to like construction work, where you know a little bit of everything. So you're kind of a jack of all trades or Jill of all trades. But you may not have a good depth of knowledge in a lot of areas. You'll have depth of knowledge in a couple of areas. So pros and cons of working contract versus full-time really comes down to three things, I think: autonomy, taxes, and benefits. The autonomy side of it is like, what do you get to choose to do? When you are a full-time employee for someone else, they're going to be telling you what to do. There's a saying that I like that says, if you don't follow your dreams, someone will pay you to follow theirs. And it's pretty true that if you don't start your own business, someone's going to hire you to work at their business. And so the big thing around autonomy is, do you get to choose your work? Well, I did freelance work in Los Angeles area for almost 3 years, from 2000, sometime through 2006 through 2006, 2007, 2008, something like that. 2008, I got back into full-time work. And so actually, no, it was like 2005, I think. It was almost exactly 3 years that I did freelance work. And the autonomy of getting to work on the kinds of projects that I wanted to do and work with the kinds of clients that were interesting to me was kind of a big deal. Like, it was really nice to be able to tell somebody like, hey, you know what, I don't want to work on this project anymore, so I'm done. And start to wind up contracts and stuff like that. It is important that you write things into your contract, as opposed to are you building a particular project and you have to stay till it's done, or are you just helping them with a project? Are you like what we call staff augmentation, where you're just like an extra body helping with something, and whether or not you have the flexibility to go take on other contract work. As a full-time employee, though, you're going to get told what to build. You may still have some autonomy as to choose what part of that job you work on, but a lot of the times you're going to get told what to build. The second big thing to kind of compare here is taxes. So working as a contractor, depending on your tax situation and so on, you'll probably end up paying your own taxes to the government. Both state and federal government, at least here in the United States. And that can get pretty expensive depending on geography and local laws and the size of your business and whether you're incorporated. And there's a whole bunch of things. I'm not a tax accountant. I don't even play one on TV. And so, if you've got questions about it, you'll need to actually reach out to someone that knows about like business taxes. When you're a full-time employee, though, the company is generally paying all your taxes. Now, if they do what we call a contract to hire, they may hire you as a contractor for 3 months or 6 months just to make sure that you're going to fit in okay. You can almost think of it like an extended interview process, where they're going to say, hey, we want to hire you. We're going to watch you build up this knowledge. We'll train you. And if it works out, at the end of that, we're going to convert you then to a full-time employee. But you may be responsible for paying your own taxes in that contract to hire period. So that's something that you would want to clarify with the company is, are you going to pay my taxes or do I have to pay my own taxes? Same. And then the third one is benefits. So same kind of thing there. As a contractor, you're generally responsible to pay for your own health benefits and insurance and things like that. Whereas an employee, hopefully your employer is paying for those things for you. Not always the case, but in the United States, it's actually very common for employers to pay for some amount of insurance. Sometimes as an employee, they'll pay like 100% for you, but if you've got family members, you have to pay for them, out of your paycheck kind of thing. So, that changes a little bit based on, the size of the company and so on. Carmen, good to see you in chat. Hello. So the other kind of sub question with dealing with the idea of contracting is how do you find clients, and what does it mean to do things like subcontracting, and thinking about what kind of software you want to build. So as a contractor, I found a lot of my clients through, let's see, so 2005 through 2008. A lot of my work back then was a little bit of word of mouth and a lot of just telling people like, hey, you know, I'm doing contract work. If you have any work that you need me to pick up. And it was me very much targeting smaller companies saying, hey, do you have any kind of project that I can help out with? By that point, I had already had almost a decade of experience. And so contracting work at that point, people are like, okay, well, you've clearly got experience. You've got like a pretty rich portfolio. You've got, you know, kind of references and things like that they can call. Again, early in your career, it's going to be a little bit harder to kind of pull that off. It's not impossible, but it is a possibility. When it comes to subcontracting, that's basically where you might hire somebody to help you with a contract position. So let's say, just looking at folks in chat. So let's say Carmen wants to hire me and I've got way too much on my plate. And so I hire CreatureNext to help me. Well, I'm just billing Carmen for all of the time spent. And Carmen maybe doesn't know that I wrote the code or CreatureNext wrote the code. All Carmen knows is that I've given some code, you know, as a result. And so I'm billing their company. Hopefully they're paying me promptly. But they don't necessarily know who wrote it. The nice thing about that kind of scenario is that now I can just hire more people to take on lots more work. And so if I go out and I, you know, drum up a lot of business, I can then hand that contract work off to other people. The downside to that is now I'm an employer and I am responsible for paying other people. And so then it becomes a question of, well, are they contractors for me and they're responsible for paying their own taxes? Or do I actually hire them as full-time employees myself or part-time employees myself, pay them an hourly rate, and then I've got to pay all the business taxes and you know, Social Security and all the stuff that an employer actually has to pay on your behalf. When it comes to contracting though, the other thing to think about is like, what sort of market do you want to try to fall into? Like, what kinds of things do you want to focus on? Do you want to build like automation tools? Do you want to build community platforms? Do you want to build like communication pipelines of like sending data from one system to another? Because that's really the pitch that you want to give to a business in order to kind of drum up that business in the first place, where you say, this is the kind of work that my company does. So you don't want to just say like, hi, I'm a contractor and I build software. Like, you want to be a lot more specific about it. You want to be able to say, I'm a contractor and I build this kind of software. This is my specialty. I work with business automation or I work with communication pipelines. You want to be really specific about it. That's how you're going to win people over and sort of make a name for yourself and for your business. So there are a lot of things in there. And so really you need to kind of figure out what kind of software do you like to build? And then how are you going to hone in on that? How are you going to get like a lot of depth of knowledge in how those things work and be able to, you know, build those kinds of tools effectively and cost effectively as well, because you want to do it for as cheap as possible, but bill your customer for as much as possible. That's your job as a business, to make money. And so how do you do that with as little work as possible in order to maximize the profit potential that they're going to pay you? So anyway, those are a couple of ideas around like pros and cons of working full-time versus working as a contractor. So again, it comes down to the autonomy of the work, who's paying your taxes and benefits and things like that. And then how do you find the work and sort of make a name for yourself. And once you start to gain a little bit of success there, you'll find that the word of mouth kind of spreads and people will actually refer you to jobs. And you can always go back to them and say, hey, if you were really happy with that, do you know anybody else that could use this kind of work? I'm looking for more projects and things like that. Now, as a new developer, you can approach businesses and say, hey, I'm trying to gain some experience. Do you have any small projects that I could take on? I highly, highly recommend don't ever volunteer your time to do it for free to build up experience. Some people will do that and they'll say, hey, I'm just happy to work. So whatever you'll pay me, you know, even if that's $0, I think that can be counterproductive. because then it kind of falls under volunteer work and not professional experience. And so when it comes to, listing that on your resume as like a project or something about contract work, you do kind of need to be honest with folks and say, like, did you get paid for that project or not? And so that would be one downside there. So if you're new in the industry and you want to get into contracting, like I said, it's not impossible, but it can be a little more challenging to convince people you can do the job, but that doesn't mean you need to do it for free. So maybe a reduced hourly rate just to build up that experience. But it really depends on what the company needs and how long it takes you to build the tool. I could go on and on about, like, do you flat rate the project and say, I'll charge you $500 to build this no matter how long it takes? Because then they're going to do what we call feature creep, where they just keep adding, oh, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? Because you said $500. And so you want to be careful about, like, hey, for $500, I'm going to do exactly this work. And when it's done, if you want extra, then we'll like renegotiate on that. But if it's the, kind of a continuing build on software for somebody where you're just like constantly adding new things on, it can be harder to negotiate a higher rate later. So for example, if I start out and say, hey, pay me $25 an hour and I'll work on some sort of business automation tool for you. And then later on they say, hey, can you add this? Can you add this? Can you add this? And you say, cool. Yeah. Now I want to charge you $50 an hour. They're like, well, wait, you used to charge me $25 an hour. Why is it 50? And so then, it's a balance that you need to kind of make in there. So I would generally recommend, like, work a project for somebody, close it down, and then say, hey, if you've got other work, I'll come back in a couple of months and, kind of cycle back. But I actually want to focus my efforts on like some other area for a little while, and I'll circle back and check in and so on. Anyway, we could go on and on that, but I think I've kind of exhausted the theme there. So if you have other questions about it, you're welcome to reach out as well. And as always, for those that are viewing, hello, you're more than welcome to drop questions in chat and I will address those. Otherwise, I got like a giant list of questions that I'm going to try to go through, and we'll see how many we actually get through. Probably till my voice gives out, but we'll see how it goes. Cool. All right, let's move on. All right, this is an interesting one. So as an interviewer yourself, have you developed any quick interview techniques to eliminate liars, fakers, and BS? I think after a while as an interviewer, you can start to kind of spot, when someone's really embellishing something on their resume, or they're like, it's pretty clear that they, don't know something. One of the first tech interviews I ever did in California, it was like 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. And there was a guy that applied for a job, and we were looking for someone that knew how to do like networking, where they were actually connecting physical network hardware together. And someone applied and said, oh yeah, I totally know this piece of equipment that you're trying to do. And we were, because it's not just a thing of like plug in the wire and it's good to go. You have to go in and you have to like write a whole bunch of configuration files that actually get stored in the little piece of equipment itself. And this guy's resume is like, oh yeah, I know all that stuff. Well, we started interviewing him. He's like, oh yeah, I've done all that. No problem. And we're like, you really know this very specific piece of equipment? He's like, well, like I'm familiar with kind of the general kind of concept of that. And the more we drilled into it, the more we're like, so you've actually gone in and you did the configuration on the inside of this thing? It was a piece of Cisco equipment, and the operating system back then was actually called iOS, not to be confused with Apple's iOS mobile platform. And he's like, well, no, like I didn't go in and I didn't actually like write that configuration part, but I've managed to maintain the equipment. We're like, okay, well, all there is the configuration. So were you responsible for like, installing the actual hardware? And he's like, well, no. And we're like, well, what did you actually do? And it turns out he was responsible. He was the guy up in the ceiling, like running the actual physical wire and just plugging it into the back of the machine. But on his resume, he said that he knew everything about this particular piece of network equipment. And so over time, we as interviewers, we start to really hone in on questions that can help expose how much you actually know about something. And so if you say you know Python, on your resume, it's fair game. I'm going to ask you all kinds of questions about Python, and I'm going to keep asking questions about the things that my company needs you to know about Python until you can't answer those questions anymore. Because that's my job as an interviewer, is just to find the limits of your knowledge. It's not that I'm purposely trying to make you feel bad or feel like you're inadequate or something for a job, but I do need to do my due diligence and figure out what you know and what you don't know. And so I'm going to ask more and more specific questions until you don't have any more answers, and then I might back off and I'll change the subject and I'll go on to something else. And so asking a lot of very specific questions can help kind of expose people that have embellished things and say, oh yeah, I totally know that thing. I mentioned on the stream previously where I had someone apply for a job and they had listed like probably a few dozen programming languages and also frameworks and just tons and tons of tech experience on their resume. And I'm looking through the resume and I'm like, do you really know like all of these languages? And they're like, oh yeah, I've done a project in all of those languages. And it turns out it was just like a hello world or like a to-do list kind of tutorial. Like it was very surface level, like what they actually knew. And the biggest thing that tipped me off there was that they were a relatively new grad. They only had like a year or two of experience, and yet they claimed to know like 20 programming languages and used all these frameworks and built all these like, elaborate things, or made it sound like they had done so, when clearly that wasn't the case. And so as an interviewer, we just get really good at asking questions, listening to your answer, and then hopefully we're not tied to a script where we're not allowed to like go off that script and ask, follow-up questions, so that we can actually dive in and dig in and get a little more specific on the kinds of answers we actually want to hear from you, in order to find out what your actual limit of your knowledge is. And once we find that limit, that's fine. But as soon as we start to find things where you've embellished on your resume, it puts your whole resume into kind of that suspicious territory. And the last thing we want to do is waste our time in an interview. And so if you get us to a point where we start to feel suspicious about your resume, we're probably just going to shut down the interview at that point and just pass on you completely and say, thanks, we're going to not hire you, but thanks for coming in. And if you ask for feedback, we're probably just going to say like, hey, you don't have the level of experience that we wanted you to have in particular areas. And so I generally recommend like, don't put things on your resume that you can't speak to very specific like levels of knowledge. Like if you've literally spent an afternoon learning Python, don't put Python on your resume. If you've built a single project in Python, you could maybe list it like at the end of the list of things that you claim to know. And you can put that project on there. If I'm looking for a Python developer though, I'm probably looking for a certain depth of knowledge. And it would probably be better from my perspective as the interviewer for you to show me that you've got a depth of knowledge in some other area and then convince me during the interview how you're going to transfer that knowledge to Python, than to walk in and say, oh yeah, I'm totally a Python developer. And I ask you 3 questions, and on the third question, like everything falls apart and you can't answer it. That's not a good look. So just some things to keep in mind there. Art Bender mentioned in chat, what's the difference between experience or familiarity with a certain language or tool? Seeing that on a lot of job postings. So that's a great question. Let me just copy that and we'll copy, and I'll just paste that here on the screen just so other people can read it. So what's the difference between experience or familiarity with a certain language or tool? As a hiring manager, I would say that familiarity with a tool versus experience with a tool. Familiarity is like, you could get by in Python. Like you've done kind of that surface level sort of project work, but don't know like a ton about the language. But you've at least looked at it. You've tinkered with it. You have how to run the code or execute the code or compile the code. Like you could put together a little script in some way. Versus experience is like you should be able to work in this pretty proficiently on your own without having to look up a ton of documentation. Now, as developers, we look up documentation all the time. But from a hiring point of view, being experienced in something means that you've used it on probably at least a couple of projects where it's not we're not surprising you when we ask you certain kinds of interview questions. You're like, oh, I didn't know you were going to ask about that. We don't want the interview to be like that. So familiarity is like just surface level versus experience is like you're pretty proficient in it, that you can like do things on your own, looking up minimal documentation, where familiarity is, you'd probably need to look up quite a bit of stuff, but you've got enough experience in some other language that you're going to be able to transfer that skill to something else. So if you have follow-up questions on that, Heartbender, feel free to drop that in chat. But yeah, I appreciate the question. Thank you. This is a common question that I get quite a bit. What are some tips for, iOS, web, backend, full stack, front end kind of developer searching for their first job? Well, that's why my whole channel exists. I love coming up with ideas on tips and things like that to help people get that first job. Getting the first job in tech is really hard, and it's very time consuming, and it takes more effort than I think people really realize. And so there are a lot of folks that, in the community, myself, there's Jonan, Dan Moore, who I had on the show before, Martin McGovern, who runs careertherapy.com, Aaron Mullinex, who took a bit of a break, but he's going to be back online pretty soon. Like, we're all here to help people. And so there are a lot of people, there are a lot of communities out there that are willing to help you with tips. So generalizing an answer around like, what are some tips to go get that first job? It's a little bit hard to answer this specifically because it covers so many different avenues, but I would say networking is probably the number one way that you're going to get that first job. I think that being able to do good research on a company, find people in that company that are interesting to you, that are going to be like peer level developers, and then maybe find like a senior level developer that you can reach out to and connect with, and stay in contact with them as you're working on different kinds of projects. Bring them up to speed on the kinds of things that you're learning, the kinds of things that are interesting to you, and keep reiterating like why you're really interested in their company. And then when you actually apply for a job there, reach back out to those people and say, hey, I've applied for a job at your company. I'd really love to work with you. Is there any possibility that you can go talk to HR and see if they got my application? At that point, you've already applied, and so they're just confirming with HR that they got your resume, maybe a cover letter, things like that. But I would say the number one tip is probably networking. You're probably going to find your first job through networking a lot faster than just blind applying to a bunch of jobs. Now, we had Jen on the show a couple of weeks ago, and Jen put some profiles on AngelList, which is angel.co, and workforastartup.com. And Jen had a whole bunch of companies reach out to her, and that turned into a whole bunch of interviews, and that turned into a whole bunch of offers, which was super exciting to chat with Jen about. So you can check out the YouTube channel on that and kind of go see how we chatted about what that process was and so on. But there's, I think networking is still going to be the number one way to get a job in the tech industry. From there, I think working on a variety of projects is good because it can show the kinds of things that you're interested in as a developer. But I think as you research companies and learn about companies and the kinds of things that are important to them, I think that your projects should probably start to drift closer towards what that company does. So if you're super interested in, pick an industry, cryptocurrency and financial technology, then start building a project using those tools, using blockchain and whatever. Like, build a couple of projects about that to show that, yeah, I am really interested in this, so much so I'm actually taking some time to work on a project. Now, that comes with a grain of privilege because not everybody's got free time to work on a ton of free projects all the time in their spare time. And I get that. Lately, I don't have a lot of time to work on, an ever-growing backlog of project ideas of things I would love to go build. So not everybody's got the time. If you've got family members that you're caring for, or ongoing, illness or mental health issues, whatever, not everyone's got the time to work on projects. But if you can show some progression in your learning in a particular area. So, the specific question is like iOS, web, backend, full stack. We could add front end on that as well. The general tips there are like, if I really want to be a front end developer, I can't just say, hey, I want to be a front end developer. I know a little bit of JavaScript. I need to show a little bit of proficiency in that skill. It's not impossible to find a company who will say like, oh, you don't know anything about that? Cool, we'll hire you and we'll train you everything that you need to know. It's not impossible to find those companies, but it's a lot less likely. A lot of companies are going to want to hire people with at least a little bit of skill in that area. And so you're going to need to find some way of building up that skill a little bit. So wherever you want to take your career, this is the nice thing about the tech industry, and I've talked about this on the stream a bunch. The tech industry is really a choose your own adventure kind of book, where now you want to take your career in that direction. Now you want to take your career in this direction. Well, you get to choose that. You steer the boat. You get to take your career wherever you want to take it. The challenge there is, where do you want to take it? What do you want to learn? What do you want to practice? What do you want to exercise? How are you going to practice that and show people why you're interested in that thing? Because it's more than just saying, I want to do a thing. You need to be able to show them that you can actually do the thing in order to get the job. So those would be a couple of my tips. So number one is networking. And number two, try to find some way, somehow, to build some projects in the kinds of technologies or industries where you have interest, and kind of tying those things back together. As you're doing company research, I was actually just talking to some folks today about this. As you're doing company research, try to see if that company has an API or a library or a tool or something that you can build into your project. Because then when you apply for that job, it completely changes that narrative of your application from, hi, I'm Dota 2 and I've got these technical skills, to, hi, I'm Dota 2, I'm actually a customer of yours and I love your product so much I actually want to come be a part of your team. Now, you need to have more than just like surface level, like, oh, I built your thing into my project in an afternoon and I'm applying for a job tomorrow. Like, you need to have some proficiency in that tool in order to pull that off. But if you've got the time to build their tool into a project, or even just add it onto a project that you've already got, you don't have to start a whole new project around that tool. But if there's a way that you can just add that tool or API or library into an existing product or project that you've already built, it changes the whole introduction that you're making of yourself to that company. So those would be my top tips for that. Dota 2, good to see you in chat. How's it going? Dota 2 got a new job with a 50% pay raise. That is amazing. That is so awesome. Good for you. Tell us all about it in chat. You don't have to like give us dollar amounts, but like tell us about the new job. What's the new job? What you going to be doing? That's super exciting. Heartbender asks a tough question in chat. Have I ever been fired from a dev job? Oops. Let's try that again. Copy. Paste. Have I ever been fired from a dev job? I have not been fired from a dev job. I have tried really hard to keep an eye on what's going on in my place of business, like wherever I'm working, to try to get a sense of, is it time to move on from a business perspective? Is it time to move on because I've got a new interest that I want to seek out? Or is it just time to move on because, this isn't working out mutually? And so when I've put in my resignation, the amount of notice that I give the company depends a little bit on kind of the position of the company, what they're doing, how much I respect the leadership of that company, and like whether I'm going to like leave them in a bad spot by walking away. And so it varies a little bit. We typically recommend in the tech industry, like give 2 weeks notice. Some companies though, like when you say like, hey, I'm thinking about moving on, here's my notice, to be like, you know what? Like, it's cool. You can just like, tomorrow's your last day kind of thing. And so there is a bit of a risk when you put in your notice that a company just says like, hey, like today's your last day, don't worry about it. One company, for example, I put in a month's notice, and I spent that month like just putting tons of work into like documentation and finishing up some projects that they had me working on that I was pretty close to finishing, but I really needed out of that job. It wasn't paying industry salary rate. We only got 1 week of time off per year, including sick leave, and they didn't pay for any benefits. And I wanted out of that job really badly. And so I left that job. So even though I didn't really care for the company, I still gave them a month of notice because I was leaving them in a pretty bad position, and I wanted to make sure that they had lots of time to hire somebody else. And they treated me very well over that month. They paid for extra meals because they knew I was going to put in a lot of extra time writing up documentation, things like that. And so they went kind of above and beyond to make sure that I was leaving on good terms, and like it was a mutual respect that we were parting ways. Even though I didn't like the company and I didn't care for my boss, I was still leaving in a respectful way. Someone else on the team tried the same maneuver, and they're like, yeah, you know what, I think I'm going to leave too. And they're like, all right, there's the door, and basically walked him out the same day. And he's like, what the heck? Like, I tried to give you notice. And they're like, yeah, you're done. That's fine. And so not everybody's going to get treated the same way. It will come down to respect and sort of the reputation that you build up within the company. And if they know that you're going to be respectful and, and that everything has gone pretty smoothly, it'll work out pretty well. Dota 2 mentioned in chat as kind of a follow-up, I asked to be laid off once and he forced me to quit instead. So the thing with that, if the company lays you off, they are on the hook to pay unemployment and perhaps a severance and things like that. But if you resign, it can be trickier to get unemployment, and they typically don't have to pay you any sort of like severance pay. But if they ask you to leave the company, then they have to pay all this stuff. And so there are even circumstances where the company is like, look, this isn't working out. We want you to resign. Like, we don't want to have to fire you, so we want you to resign. So every company's a little bit different with how they want to handle that kind of stuff. So no benefits in the States is pretty terrible. It is. And it's also pretty terrible that our health benefits are tied to the job. And if I change my job, now I've got to sign up for all new benefits and hope my current doctors and dentists and whatever, like, take that new insurance and whatever. It's a big mess, for sure. That's one thing I do kind of miss about Canada. Although the health benefits in Canada are not as great as everybody thinks. I mean, yeah, it's free, but you tend to get put on wait lists for a lot of stuff. But that's a whole other topic. Cool. All right. Well, let's move on with some more questions. So again, if you've got other questions, please drop them in chat. I'm more than happy to take these kind of as we go. How much time should you take off between jobs? Looks like my camera froze again. Let me free up my camera. There we go. How much time off should you take between jobs? Should is kind of a loaded word. You can take as much time as you need between jobs if you have kind of the financial means and so on. In some areas of the United States, I don't know if this is like nationwide, but in California at least, if you quit a job like early in the month, the company actually pays your benefits for the entire month. And so if you quit like on day 1 of the month, you actually get benefits through the end of the month, which can work out really nicely if you start a job during that month. So for example, someone that I was coaching recently, they got a job, and their contract said that their benefits would kick in on the first day of the month following the month that they got hired. And so their first day of work was going to be like November 1st, which means their benefits was going to kick in December 1st. And I said, well, maybe as a negotiation point, you could ask if your first day could be the last working day of October, which would be the 29th. Make that your first day, take that as a day off, so that your benefits would actually kick in on your actual first day of November 1st. And they didn't. They didn't negotiate for that. But I negotiated for that when I went to work at Stream. They had the same kind of clause in the benefits where they said your benefits will kick in on the first day of the following month. And I'm like, well, I've got a family. We need health insurance, and I can't afford to, pay for, Cobra insurance or whatever out of pocket. And so you either need to give me a signing bonus to pay for that, or could you make my start date in June instead of like early July? And they came back and said, oh yeah, we'll totally let you like make your start date in June and just take a couple of days of vacation time. So it was actually really decent of them to do that. And I think a lot of companies are willing to be flexible on that kind of thing. Now you are kind of borrowing against your time off in order to do that. But for the nature of the question though, how much time should you take off between jobs? I generally recommend try to take a week or two. Like, take some time and relax and sort of reward yourself for like, hey, I finished up that job well done, yay me, and find a way to unwind a little bit and get yourself sort of mentally and physically ready to get ready for that next job. I've worked jobs where literally like Friday was my last day at one job and Monday was my first day on the next job, and like literally have no time in between. I've taken as much as a month between jobs. It really does come down to like your financial concerns and things like that. Like if you've got money in savings that you can rely on, that you can take time off, take as much time off as you need. The companies where you're applying for a job, they'll generally ask what sort of start date you want, and you can push it out within reason. Like you can't say like, oh yeah, it's October 21st today. I'd like to start that job May 1st if I could. They're like, well, we're hiring now. Like, we need you to start sooner than that. And so they'll probably push back if you try to like make your start date like way off in the future. But if it's like, it's early December or mid-December and you're like, could we just make my first day like the first day back in January? They'd be like, yeah, okay, that's cool. Enjoy your holidays. And so it's really up to you. How much time can you afford to take off? Is what it tends to come down to. And if you've got a bit of a buffer and a cushion between jobs, take as much time as you can. Get a good rest. Maybe take a mini vacation. There are some things that I tell people about, if you are working at a job and they offer stock options, however much money you would pay them on a regular basis to buy those stock options, put in a bank account. And then if you decide not to buy the stock options, now you've got that cash, and that cash can kind of carry you over in that time between jobs if you decide not to buy those stock options. Or if you decide, nah, you know what, that company's actually not going anywhere, so I don't want to invest that money in my stock options. Well, now you've just got cash on hand for whatever you need. Go take a vacation, go take a little trip somewhere, go fly to the other side of the country and just, if you're on the West Coast, go fly to the East Coast and like dip your toe in the ocean over there. Like just do something, just unwind and relax a little bit. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Again, if you have the financial means to do so. If you don't have the financial means, then, take whatever time is going to feel like it's relaxing for you. So maybe make your last day like on a Wednesday instead of on the Friday. And then you've got like Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So you get like a 4-day weekend before starting that next job. Like I find for me, it's good to kind of unwind a little bit, to kind of wrap up that job and go, and just kind of relax a little bit and then start that next job. So between touring and going back to stream, I actually took like almost 3 weeks off. And in that time, like about 12 or 13 days of that, we did a giant road trip around the US. We all piled in the car and we went down to Texas, and we went up through Tennessee to get up to up to Kentucky. Saw some friends in Kentucky. And then we swung through Indiana for a little while, then back through Kansas City. Like, we made a really giant road trip out of it, and it was great. It was fantastic. It was a lot of driving. But it was what I needed to kind of unwind between my teaching position at Turing and getting back into the tech industry at Stream. All right, this next one's a little bit loaded and a little bit long. See if this is even going to fit on the screen if I save this in here. Not really. Let me see if I can stretch this out. Yeah, it's fine. I'll do this similar question as the second part. All right, hot topic time. What's the timetable of ghosting from a company? I didn't hear from them for 4 days now after a second interview. I did email them a follow-up, but no reply. the kind of the follow-up similar question that I got said, I reached out to somebody for an introduction and they never replied. Should I ask again or find someone else? So it really comes down to I'm trying to network. I'm trying to get feedback. I'm trying to find out what's going on and nobody's writing me back. What do I do? And this is a pretty common theme. There's been a bunch of stuff on LinkedIn recently. Martin McGovern just did a podcast with someone where they were talking about ghosting in an interview process. And that whole ghosting thing is basically where you get an interview and then they just never call you back. Like you get no feedback, no phone call, just nothing. They just kind of disappear into the ether. And it's really discouraging for us as developers to spend the time and the energy mentally and physically to prepare for these interviews and then not move forward, but then not be told we're not moving forward and not being told any feedback as to why. It's very discouraging, and it leads to a lot of anxiety and self-doubt and things like that, and companies need to knock it off. I think companies need to respect the fact that, as candidates, you're putting in a lot of effort to prepare for these interviews. And if they're not going to progress with you through the interview, they need to give you a reason why. So when it comes to these two questions, so the first one was like, I didn't hear back from a company after my second interview. I emailed them a follow-up. I would probably start by asking this person in response, like, how long did you wait before emailing them that follow-up? And so kind of the guideline that I tend to coach people is, whatever the last day of that interview was, like send them a thank you and say, hey, thanks, really appreciate the time everybody took. Like send them a note of gratitude. I always recommend, always send somebody some gratitude when they do something for you. So whether it's an interview or just a networking kind of thing or a virtual coffee, like whatever it is, send them a thank you. And then start counting down how many days. And I would say, wait maybe a week, especially if it's been an interview and they haven't gotten back to you. I would say within a week, email them back and say, hey, it's been a week. And again, you have to word this in a respectful way. You don't want to sound demanding or entitled or anything like that. But you can email them and say, hey, it's been a week since that interview. I'm really curious about feedback and next steps. I'm still super interested in the job. I would really love to hear some feedback from you about what the next steps are going to be. And then I would wait a couple of more days. I would probably wait maybe 3 days at most before following up one last time to say, hey, I'm still looking for feedback. I'd still like to know what's going on. Now, when you send that first email like a week later, not the thank you, but like the follow-up a week later, it is possible that recruiters are just slammed. They're really busy. They're going through tons of screenings and tons of interviews, and it could just be that they're busy. And so you send that email a week later. If you don't get a response, it could just mean that they're busy. If you send another response within a couple of days of that, it's going to kind of, sit in their mind like, oh, shoot, I really meant to get back to Ian, on Monday when he sent me that email. Now it's Thursday and he's like following up again. I'm going to sit down right now and just write out a quick little note. There was a piece of productivity advice that I heard a long time ago that said, if you have like a whole list of things to do and something's only going to take like 5 minutes, do that first. Like just get all the really fast stuff out of the way. And I think that if a recruiter follows that same kind of advice, they're going to realize like, you know what, writing Ian this email message is going to take me like 5 minutes. I'm just going to do that right now. If they don't do it when you send that first message like a week later, when you send that message 2 or 3 days after that, you're going to be like, shoot, I meant to do that. I'm going to do it right now. It's only going to take a minute just to give them kind of a heads up on what's going on of either like, yes, we're moving forward or no, we're not. And what those next steps are going to be. And so the timing of that will vary a little bit by company. It is super disappointing though, if it's been a long time and you try to follow up and you just get zero response. I think that that's a major sign of disrespect from the company. And if they're doing that to candidates, what are they doing to their own employees? Like as a candidate, they should be trying to win you over and convince you that, they're a great company to work at. And if they're treating you that way, what are they going to treat you like as an employee? How much respect are they going to give you as an employee? So some food for thought there. The second part of the question was kind of along a similar vein. And I would say that the advice is probably a little bit similar. They're basically saying, I reached out to somebody for an intro. So I'm trying to do my networking and I sent an intro and they never responded. Should I ask again, or should I find someone else at the company? My follow-up question to this is, well, how did you try to reach out? Was it over email? Was it over LinkedIn? Was it through meetup.com? Like, there's so many different ways that you could try to find folks. And not everybody checks all the channels all the time. For me, for example, like years ago, LinkedIn probably would have been the worst place to try to reach me, because I was getting hounded by recruiters all the time on LinkedIn. And so I think I actually had a filter in my Gmail that just sent all LinkedIn notices to the trash for a while, just because most of it was just recruiters anyway. And I would occasionally log in just to see if there was like a legit question in there from somebody, or somebody actually wanted to connect, for like proper networking reasons. But it was probably the worst way to try to reach out to me. Nowadays, LinkedIn's probably the number one way to reach me. So if you're trying to find me, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm paying attention to that like probably at least every day. And so it could just be that the communication avenue that you're using is just not something that they're used to checking. And that could be email, or, whatever site that you're emailing them through, social media, or like sort of industry social media like LinkedIn. And so I guess the same kind of thing applies. Like, how long should you wait before trying to follow up and meet them again? I would send them one more message and say, hey, I'm still really interested in networking. I've got some specific questions that I want to ask you about the company. So again, this should tie into the kind of the company research of, what is it that you're trying to learn about the company, and how are you presenting those questions to the person that you're trying to network with? And again, if you don't get a response right away, you could maybe give them like another week. But I would say like usually 3 messages, like 3 attempts of contacting them is probably like bordering on too many. Like 1 is good, 2 is like, okay, if they don't respond to that, you could maybe throw out a 3rd one saying like, hey, I'm still around. If you ever want to connect, I'm more than happy to chat. But at that point, I would probably just find somebody else to network with. And so what I would generally recommend is, if there's a company where you're interested, try to find at least 2 people who are sort of peer level. So if you're an entry-level dev, find 2 more entry-level devs that work at that company. If you're a senior level dev, find a senior level dev. And then find someone else even more senior than your role and try to network with them. And if possible, if the company is big enough that there are several more senior people, try to network with some of them. And lean on them a little bit for mentorship and ideas and things like that. But yeah, again, like, you're asking somebody for their time. And so you don't want to write them a big giant message and be like, here's 50 questions that I want to ask you. Just ask them like a single question. And if they respond, now you've got that open channel, and you can say, cool, hey, have you got time for like a Zoom call or a Google Meet call? I really want to chat a little bit more about your company, and I'd love to ask you like some specific questions about the engineering team or the engineering culture. If you got like 10 minutes, could we do a 10-minute call? And keep it at 10 minutes unless they say like, hey, I've got extra time if you want to chat. Otherwise, cap it and say, hey, I want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate that 10 minutes. Thanks. Could we do another call in like a week if I have more questions? And see what they say. You don't want to like hound them and call them every single day. But I think following up on those kinds of calls is important, and just building up that rapport and sort of professional relationship with people. So Heartbender mentioned in chat, I was displaced today. They gave me 60 days to find a job within the company or outside the company. I guess this is better than being terminated. Yeah, it still stinks though. I'm sorry to hear that happened. If they're willing to pay you for 60 days to find a job, then that's great. What you need to do is find out from them is, what is the balance between spending time looking for a job and actually doing the work at the job where they, do they still expect you to put in some amount of effort? And so maybe ask them for a clear definition of, do you want me just to keep working on this stuff? Or are you going to lower the amount of work that I actually have to do, so that I got time to go for interviews and things like that? 60 days doesn't sound like a lot of time to go get a new job, but if you've already got some professional experience, I think some companies would probably be more willing to chat with you. But you'll definitely want to start that networking like immediately, and try reaching out to companies like ASAP to try to find that next role. But I'm sorry to hear that happened for you. Zooey222 asked a good follow-up question in chat. Is it a good idea to follow up after a rejection? And is it okay to ask how I can be a better candidate next time? I'm a huge fan of asking for feedback. So you're probably never going to hear me say like, no, never ask them for feedback. I think, asking them for feedback is a really wise choice. That's the only way you're going to get better. You're only going to improve by asking them how you can improve. And so I think that's actually a very important part of the process for sure. Now, what does that message actually look like? If they write you a message and say like, hey, thanks, but we're not going to move forward, you can write them back and say, hey, I just want to let you know that I really appreciate everybody's time that, spent their hours, talking to me, interviewing me. It was really great to know you and your team. I'd love to stay in contact with you and the team if possible. I'm still super interested in the company. I'd love to reapply again in the future. Do you have any tips for me on what I can do to make myself a better candidate next time? And it might just be like, oh, we didn't move forward because you need more experience. Then I would ask them very specifically, like, what kind of experience could I go work on in order to be that better candidate in 6 months or a year? Like, what can I go learn? What can I go build? Is there a certification that I could go get that would make me, a better candidate for that particular position in the future? Ask them for very specific feedback. And they may say like, hey, you know what, your level of experience working with databases was a little bit lower than what we wanted for the job. So go learn more about relational databases, or go learn about, non-relational databases, and get specific feedback from them. I think that's the only way that you're going to be able to sort of progress through that. Zooey also asked, thanks, I hope I didn't miss you going over my resume. So I'm going to do the resume reviews on Sunday. So tonight's just Q&A. All right, cool. Let's move on with more questions. So I've got like just a boatload of questions. I was saying at the very beginning of the session that the more questions I answer, the more I get, which is fantastic. And I do try to deduplicate the questions so I'm not covering the same questions all the time. But I'm also still learning things myself, and sometimes I'll change my viewpoint on things too. And so you may occasionally hear me answer a question slightly differently than I did maybe a month ago. And that's okay. Just shows you that I'm still learning and growing too. And I think that that's important. And I think one of these days, I might have someone on the stream to do some of these questions with me as well, so that you get to hear more than just my perspective. But I always recommend, like, don't ever just listen to one person's perspective and take that as truth, and this is the only truth about that particular topic. Ask that question to a lot of people and get answers from a lot of people, and then try to figure out from all of those answers what you think the actual answer is, because there's always like middle ground in there somewhere. This was an interesting one that I heard. Why would a company not allow applicants to ask questions during a job interview? Is it a good or bad idea to ask your own questions to the interviewer? So we did a whole panel almost a month ago. Was it a month ago? On what kinds of questions to ask and how to ask questions at an interview. So you can definitely check out the YouTube channel for that. I'll drop that link in the chat here. So youtube.com/Ian Douglas. So you can find the whole archive there, and there's a whole video. I had a whole bunch of people. I had Martin on the show. I had Lex Stewart on the show. Oh, shoot, now I'm forgetting all the names. Who else did I have on the show that night? I had Brett Dangerfield on the show. I'm totally blanking on who the fourth person was. I'm sorry. I had 2 people from HR and 2 people who were engineering managers. Oh, Emmanuel Mwangi. And so Emmanuel and Brett were my engineering managers, and then I had Martin and Lex from kind of the career coach side of things. And we were talking just about like what kinds of questions that you should ask at the interview. So definitely check that out on YouTube. As far as the first part of this question, like why would a company not allow applicants to ask questions during an interview? I mean, there is a time factor to be aware of there. Like if you're doing like a 1 hour interview slot, and they do a couple of minutes of introduction, and then they start on some kind of code challenge, and the code challenge goes really, really long. That person's got other things to do. They may need to, say, okay, well, you've got all these back-to-back like 1 hour interviews, but they also want to make sure like you've got a break to go to the bathroom or something like that. And so they don't want to go like back to back to back to back and not give you a break. And so it might just be that they ran out of time for you to ask questions. But I would say like a company should never specifically say like, you are not allowed to ask us questions. And if you try to ask a question, if they kind of blow it off and say like, no, we're not gonna address those questions, that's actually a pretty big flag for me. Any company should be very open to having discussion. I've said on the stream a bunch of times, and I stand by this, that an interview should be conversation, not interrogation. It should never just be a one-way thing where they're asking you a question and you're giving them an answer. So I would say if a company is ever refusing to answer questions or just not giving you the space to ask questions, that could be a flag of maybe you don't want to work there. I would say maybe ask ahead of time, like before you even go to the interview, and just say, hey, I've got some questions that I'd love to ask as part of the process. Will there be time for that as part of the interview? And they'll let you know. And they may say, well, you know what, you're going to meet with Ian for that 1 hour block. Ian may not have time to answer any questions for you, but we'll make sure that you can meet with somebody after that to make sure that your answers or your questions get answered. Like any good company should be respectful of your time and the fact that you have questions. Now, they're not going to sit there for like hours and hours and hours and answer tons of questions for you because they've got other things to do too. So I would say like try to limit it to the number of questions that you want to ask and make sure that you're asking appropriate questions of the right people. Like you wouldn't ask somebody in HR about the engineering process, and you wouldn't ask, somebody in engineering something that would be more appropriate for the HR team. So make sure that who you're talking to, that you have appropriate questions for them. And as an example there, like if you're talking to somebody in HR and you've got a question about engineering, then you could say like, hey, I appreciate you taking the time. These are the questions that I want to go over. By the way, is there also a time that I could speak to somebody on the engineering team? Because I've got some specific questions I'd like answered about the engineering side of things as well. And hopefully they'll make that happen. They may do like a follow-up call or just say, well, why don't you email us those questions and we'll pass those on and hopefully we'll get you an answer or something. Like have a conversation about it. But they should not actively stop you from asking questions during the interview. I think that that's a huge flag. Going back to a theme that we just had a minute ago, should you keep coding on the side if you have a job? If you're able to. I think it's important, especially in the tech industry, to keep growing your skills and keep finding things that interest you. Whether you have the time and the ability and the energy and the privilege to work on a side project varies greatly from person to person. And so you may not have time to actually go and work on a side project. If you do, great, do it if you can. But if you can't, like, it's not a big deal, but it will be a little bit harder to kind of grow and advance in your career if you want to go learn something else and take your career in a different kind of direction than the kind of skill that you're using. So as an example, let's say I've got a full-time job as a Ruby on Rails developer, but I really want to get into mobile development. Well, if I don't go practice mobile development and I don't go explore mobile development, I don't start tinkering with that, it's going to be a lot harder for me to go apply for a job and say, hey, I'm this Ruby on Rails developer, but I really want to, get into Android development. They're going to look at my resume and go, well, you don't do Android development, so why would I hire you for the role? It becomes a much harder sell to them to convince them like how you're going to transfer that knowledge. It's not impossible, but it is harder to do. Companies want to hire people that have at least some amount of skill. And I think that you need to have some means of showing them why or how you're going to transfer that knowledge into this other area if you're going to start to take your career in that other direction. So should you keep coding? I think it's important to just constantly grow. If you sign up for a job in tech, you're signing up for like lifelong learning. I believe that wholeheartedly. I think that it's a thing where you can't just learn one language, one framework, and that's going to do you for the rest of your career, especially if you're young. If you're older in life, the rest of your career is going to be a shorter amount of time than for others. But if you're new at this and you're just out of college or you're just out of a boot camp and you're still like in your 20s or early 30s, you got a long career ahead of you. And if you don't continue to learn, then your skills are going to get stale. And there are pros and cons to that. Like, you're going to get very, very good at that one particular technology and that one particular stack, but fewer companies are going to be looking for that expertise in that area because you fill a much smaller sort of need on their team than someone who can do a lot of things. And so I kind of go back to an illustration of like a Swiss Army knife that, it's got all the different gadgets and gizmos on the knife. That's the kind of engineer that I wanted to be in my career. And so I've learned to do a lot of things. I'm not particularly the best person for database maintenance. I'm not particularly the best person for DevOps. I'm not the best person for front-end development. But I can do some things like really well, like back-end, I'm actually really good. Scalability, I'm actually pretty good. Architecture, I'm really good. Like these are things that I've gone really deep in my knowledge. I've got, a lot more depth of knowledge in those things. But I can fill the gaps on a lot of other topics. I can write code in a lot of different languages and so on, because that's the kind of engineer that I wanted to be. And so that's how I've focused my time. So, should I also keep coding on the side? Well, there are a lot of things that I've been interested in as well. Like I wanted to get into data analytics and data engineering and learn more about data pipelining. And I started actually taking some courses in that. But then life got busy, work got busy, and I had to drop it. I just couldn't continue it. And it's unfortunate when that happens because, I recognize that this is something where I don't want my own skills to get stale, but I've also got to find time to sort of carve out, a small block of time to keep growing and learning those kinds of things too. So should you keep coding? Yes. Does it have to be on the side if you have a job? I think is kind of where I'd split that question into two parts. Should you always keep learning? Absolutely. Should you do it as a side project if you've already got a full-time job? If you can, but I think that there's a balance to strike. So don't put in like 40, 50 hours at your job and put in 40 or 50 hours on a side project and completely burn yourself out. That's not worth it. So you got to do what's right for you and what's right for your career and the direction that you want to take your career. This is an interesting question that came up in, I think it was in the Turing Slack channel. Someone asked, what do you think about negotiating for a 4-day work week? I'd like to do that at some point, perhaps for 80% pay. And so basically what they're saying is I want to work 80% of the time and make 80% pay. And the discussion kind of went into, well, could you work like 4 10-hour days to still fill up your 40-hour work week? And they basically said, well, no, I only want to put in like 8-hour days, but I only want to work 4 of those days and have like a 3-day weekend every weekend. Should I negotiate for that? Every company is going to have different flexibilities on what you can negotiate for. And I think in today's realm where companies really want to try to retain employees, I think they may be a little more open-minded to some things. They may be a little bit resistant, but it also depends on the amount of work and the productivity that they see come out of it. And so you could say like, hey, you know what, I'm thinking about, could I move to a 4-day work week? I would caveat this explanation with don't bring up a reduction in pay to start with. Just bear with me on this experiment, this thought experiment. If you go to your boss and say, hey, I'm thinking about maybe evaluating like a 4-day work week at some point. Could we give this a try next month where I work like 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week and see what you feel about my productivity level if I'm only working 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week, just to give it a try. Even if you've got to give me like that Friday off as PTO or, find out some way of like making up that time later on if it doesn't work out. But if it does work out, is that an arrangement that we could do on an ongoing basis? I think the thing that you need to look at there is you're probably going to have to look at like current work or current research around like the 40-hour work week and why we even have the 40-hour work week in the first place and how much productivity you get out of that. But I think that it's a conversation you need to have with your boss. But you also want to check with your HR team about the minimum number of hours that you have to work in order to keep your benefits. Some companies will say, well, you got to work at least 32 hours a week in order to get benefits, or 30 hours a week in order to get benefits. And if you drop below that number of hours, you then become a part-time employee and you lose all your benefits, and you may lose other perks and things like that. So definitely check with your HR team, but talk to your boss about it first. And then if you are ready, and your boss is agreeable to this, then you can go talk to the HR team and say, like, hey, what would have to happen? But I would highly, highly recommend, don't bring up the topic of reducing your pay. Companies would be like, you want me to pay you less? Yeah, I'll pay you less. If that means that they're going to get slightly less productivity out of you, that's kind of like a short-term pain point. But, my job is, my responsibility as a hiring manager, or just as a manager of a team, is to pay you as little as possible. And if you're volunteering for a pay reduction, I'm probably going to take you up on it. So don't take them up on it. If they bring it up, then you can discuss it. But if you just say like, hey, I'd like to work like a 4-hour or a 4-hour work week, that'd be really ideal. Could I work a 4-day work week? Wait for them to bring up the idea of compensation and adjustment before you bring it up. So, but yeah, definitely do your research on it, and ask your boss if you can trial it for like a month, and just say, hey, for a month, I want to take every Friday off. You evaluate productivity and my output, and I'll talk to you about my level of energy, my level of happiness, and the kinds of things, how I'm spending that extra time. Because if you're happier, you're going to be more productive on the job. And if you're more productive, then maybe you're getting as much work done in those 4 days as you would have in 5 days. So I think it's worth having that conversation with your boss. Hello to all the new viewers that kind of dropped in. If you've got questions about interview prep and career coaching and things like that, tonight's just a Q&A session. Probably going to go for another 15, 20 minutes or so before we wrap up. I've got like a boatload of questions to go through. I've still got like 20 or more questions to kind of go through here. But if you've got questions, please drop them in chat. I'm happy to kind of address those as we go. And otherwise, I'm just going to keep going through some more of these questions. This is a really good one to kind of jump into. Should I take a support role just to get into the company? And then how do I transfer to a developer role later? Some people think that this is kind of a risky move, that if you get a job in support or you get a job in QA, that's the only thing you're ever going to do. That first job in tech is really hard to get. If you can find a way into a company that you care deeply about, and you're like, and you care deeply about them more than because they're giving you a paycheck. So let me qualify that. You care about the company because of what they do, because of who they're helping, the user base, like what their product is or who the leaders are. Like you care about that aspect of the business, not the fact that they're paying you, every 2 weeks or twice a month or whatever. But if you genuinely care about the company, you could explore the idea of getting a non-developer job. In November, I'm actually going to have a bunch of people on the stream. I think we've aimed for November 14th. We're going to have a whole bunch of people on the stream who went through a coding boot camp and then got a job that was not full-time coding. And we're going to talk to them about what was it like to get that first job? What was that process? How did you even pitch the idea of getting that kind of job where you've just studied software development for 7 months and then not get a full-time development job, and what kinds of jobs are there? And so it's going to be a pretty interesting panel. That'll be in about 3 weeks or so. So November 14th. So check that out. But kind of back to the question, should I take a support role just to get in, and then how do I transfer into another department later? It can be risky to apply for a job and then say, why do you want to work here? Why do you want this particular job? To say, oh, I actually only want this job for a small amount of time, and then I want to transfer into something else. There is a bit of a myth that, once you get a particular kind of job, that you're now sort of pigeonholed or forced to stay in that job. Like once you do support, you only do support. Once you do QA, you only do QA. That's a bunch of baloney. You can be whatever you want to be in tech. If you get a job in support and then you want to be a developer, then, as long as you're practicing those skills in some way to where, when you apply for a developer job within the company later, or, apply for a promotion or transfer or whatever, that you still have those skills, then they should absolutely, qualify you for that job and consider you for that job. I think here's my take. Some people really look down on support and QA, and I think that that's a bunch of crap too, because I find in my experience, people that work support and deal with customers and people that work in QA have a much deeper appreciation of the product that they're building when they do go become a developer. As a support engineer, you're interfacing with the customer, and so you have a much deeper appreciation and a much deeper user empathy, so that when you become a developer for that company, you're like, but if we do it that way, these people are going to get ticked off, or the user experience is actually going to be really poor because of this if we make this kind of change. And you can now sort of be a liaison for the customer. You can advocate for the user as a developer on the team. And so you can use that as a selling point for, hey, I really want to transfer into a developer role. I've learned so much as a support person on the team that now moving into a developer role, I've got all this extra knowledge and deeper knowledge in what the customers actually want and the problem areas that the customers have. And that actually is going to make you a better developer. Same thing with QA. I've told a story on the stream before, and I'd love to get this person on the stream sometime just to chat. But I hired them at SendGrid, and I put them into a QA role, and they hated it. They threatened to quit their job, and they hated me for it, I'm sure. And I said, please just give me like an amount of time. I think I said a year, but it ended up not being quite a year. And I said, give me a block of time. And they hated working in QA. But when they came back to the team, they were actually a better developer than some of the intermediate developers that I had hired at the same time. Now, this person was a junior dev, but when they came out of that QA time, they were actually a better developer because of the time they spent in QA. A little bit from a different angle from the user's perspective that I just talked about with a support engineer. A QA engineer, they tend to have much deeper knowledge as far as like, hey, a change in this system has a ripple effect, and it's going to go affect all of these other systems. And so if we make a change over here, it's going to impact all these other things. Sometimes as developers, we kind of put the blinders on and go, well, this is the only thing I know. This is the only thing I'm working on. And so this is all I care about. But when you're in a QA role, you can't have those blinders on. You got to look at how everything impacts everything, and how is data being communicated from one system to another system. And so this guy actually came off the team, off the QA side of it, onto back as a developer, way better developer, because he had a much deeper understanding of how all of the systems within SendGrid kind of communicated, because he got a lot more exposure to that. Where the developers on my team, we were building a product at the time where we were all just super heads down, and that was the only thing we were really paying attention to. And so I find that people are like, oh, you're just QA, or oh, you're just support. It's like that, like in my mind, I got a ton of respect for those folks. As a developer, having been in the industry a long time, I have a ton of respect for people that do QA jobs and support jobs. So should you take that kind of role just to get into the company? I think as an entry-level dev, if you can keep your skills up, it's a great way to get a job in a company and show them that you care about the user. Now, how you make that happen is kind of a whole other side effect of having good communication with your boss. What you don't want to do, well, let me back up. As part of the application process, you can say like, hey, you know what? I'm a developer. I've been trained as a developer. But I really care about this company. And so what I would prefer to do is start as a support engineer, learn about the user, learn about the systems, learn about the common pain points, and then transition into an engineering role where I'm doing full-time coding. You can talk to them about that, as like talk to the recruiter about that and say like, this is the path that I want to take as a person, as a candidate hiring or applying for this job within the company. Then it's up to them of how do they make that happen, because you've already expressed intent and desire to not be in that role a long time. And you can say, I'll be in that role for 6 months to a year, and then I want to transition into a developer role. Get it in writing and have constant communication with them over, hey, just as a reminder, It's been 3 months. We said it's 6 months I could move into a developer role. What's that transition going to look like over the next 3 months? And have them work out a plan for you. And if they say, well, maybe it's not going to happen, then you can say, well, this is what we agreed to. And so if that's going to change, then we need to both kind of talk about it, communicate about it, agree on what that new timeline is going to be, because this is what I said I wanted. And if it doesn't work out, well, guess what? You can still go get some other job as a developer and say, hey, you know what? I specifically on purpose took this job doing QA or doing support because I really wanted to learn how all of those aspects of the business worked before I got into development, because I knew it was going to make me a better developer. And then go apply for a developer job somewhere else if that company won't transition you. But the fact that you've gone through their QA department or their support department means you've gained a lot of domain knowledge about what the company is. You've gone through a lot of training. You've got a lot of exposure to what the business is. And so they should retain you. They better retain you. You're going to be a way better developer on that team than somebody they hire off the street that doesn't know anything about that stuff. And so I think you can use that as a negotiation tactic to say, to actually get into the company in the first place. So if you're curious about that and you want some help with that kind of thing, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I can help you word those kinds of things. I can, maybe give you some pointers around cover letters and whatever on how you want to specifically word that and say, I really want to get into development, but I want this kind of role to get started because I know it's going to make me a better developer later. It's going to give me deeper user empathy, or it's going to give me more systems level knowledge so that when I get into that development role in the company, I'm going to be a much better developer. So there are ways that we can kind of position that. Someone asked as a follow-up in chat, can somebody fresh out of school get into QA? Yeah, absolutely. If your school has taught you QA types of things like Git branching and cherry picking commits and good testing development, doesn't necessarily need to be test-driven development, but that you know how to run tests and you know how to write additional tests and maybe work in some other kind of test framework. Besides the one that, just using Ruby on Rails, for example, if all the tests are written in RSpec, could you go write some tests in a tool like Selenium that actually pull it up in a browser and you actually see the buttons get pressed and the forms filled in and things like that? Can you go build automated testing in a tool like that so that you've actually got browser-based testing? Because tools like RSpec, they're kind of pretending to be a browser, but it's not the same thing. Of course, this is applicable for web apps only. It's not the same thing as actually being in a browser and actually clicking on these things and going from screen to screen. And so anything you can do to kind of automate that sort of process and be in a real browser, it's kind of like what we call user testing, where a user is actually typing the stuff in and clicking on the buttons, but it's automated. So it runs much, much faster and gives you sometimes better information about what's working, what's not working. So yes, you can get a QA job straight out of school. Absolutely. And a lot of that depends on how you talk about the job and why you want that kind of job. But absolutely, you can do that. All right, let's get to a couple more here. This next one was kind of interesting as well. Should I apply for jobs when I don't feel 100% ready? In my perspective, I think if you wait until you feel ready, you're never going to apply for that job. So there are studies and research about white men tend to apply for jobs when they think they match about 30% of a job, where women and people of color, they tend to only apply for a job when they match 80% of the requirements or what they feel are the requirements for the job. And so that could play into a lot of why there's a lot of white men in tech and less, non-white men in tech, because people feel like they aren't ready to go apply for that job yet. Should you apply for the job? Absolutely. I think you should. One piece of advice that I saw as a follow-up to this question was to work on projects instead of, trying to, prepare to sort of be ready, or like, how do you get ready for that job if you don't feel 100% ready? One piece of advice that I saw as a follow-up on this was like, well, just go continue to work on projects until you do feel ready. But again, I think that you could just keep working on projects and then you get distracted and you end up like maybe taking all of that work in a different direction than that job that you really had your eyes set on. Another person gave a piece of advice that said, well, there's no reason that you can't apply for a job and work on projects at the same time. And this kind of goes back to what I said in another question. Not everybody's got kind of that position and privilege to work on side projects. And I think that that's an important distinction to make, that not everybody has the means and the time and the capability and the energy at the end of the day, to be able to put time into a side project to where they feel like they're making significant enough progress to have actually learned something. For example, when I lived in Los Angeles, it was not uncommon to have like a 45-minute to 90-minute commute each direction. And then you put in like an 8 or 9 hour workday, and then you got to like make that same commute all the way home. Well, there goes like 12 hours of your day, by the time you commute and you work, you've got to sleep, you've got to have a meal, you got to like spend time with your friends and or significant other and or family. If you start tinkering with a project at 9 o'clock and you go to bed by 10, how much progress are you really going to make in an hour to where you feel like you made productive progress on that project in only an hour? It's going to feel really hard to do, and I think that could potentially lead to more burnout. So I think my advice here, should you apply when you don't feel 100% ready, I would say, well, how ready do you feel? If you feel like 60% ready, 70% ready, could you apply for that job? Maybe. If it's like a FANG level company, Facebook, Amazon, Google, Netflix, Airbnb, like all those kinds of like big tech companies, you're probably going to want to feel more like 100% ready, because those interviews are grueling and they're really, really hard. But if you're just going for like, any kind of tech job that's not like a name brand kind of job, I don't think you have to feel 100% ready. I think that the more you practice interviewing, the better you're going to get at interviewing. The more you practice technical challenges, the better you're going to be at doing technical challenges. And so it really comes down to practice makes better. It's kind of the saying that I use. I heard Martin talk on his podcast today, and he said practice makes progress, which is another way of saying practice makes better. You're going to get better at things that you put your time into. So whether that's a project or just finding time to practice interviewing, you can find incremental improvements to get better at things. But that incremental improvement also needs good feedback as well. And I've talked about that on the stream a bunch too, that I could go work out at the gym and I could just lift weights and hope that I gain some muscle and I don't hurt myself. But unless I've actually got a coach there showing me what to do and why to do it a particular way and give me good feedback on what I'm doing wrong, I'm probably going to hurt myself, and it's probably going to take me longer to see the outcome that I want. And so having people that can kind of coach you and guide you and talk you through things, I think is a more effective approach to practicing interviewing. So should you apply if you don't feel ready? I could put the question back on you and say, what would make you feel ready? Is it that you don't understand, a couple of algorithms that you think you need to know? Is it that you don't know a technology as deep as you think you should know? And it comes down to, why do you think you need to know that? Do you know for a fact that the company is going to ask you that kind of technical challenge, or do you just want to be practiced just in case they do it? I think that that can be tricky. It can be a little dangerous to feel like you are so prepared that you can handle any interview ever. I think as you do your networking, as you do your research, you can talk to people at those companies and say, hey, what should I really study? Like, what's really important to study to get a job here? What do I really need to know? Like, do I have to go study, breadth first search and heap algorithms and sorting algorithms? if I'm just doing like JavaScript front end React apps. Like I'm never actually going to go build any of that stuff for real. I'm not actually going to go build a recursive function as part of my front end JavaScript app. Is that really going to be part of the interview process? And you don't want to ask in a tone that's sounding critical of them or their practice. But you can certainly ask like, hey, what are the actual important skills that I really should be studying to best prepare for this particular job or this particular interview? I think a lot of companies are willing to be more transparent than you think about what to actually go study and how to feel prepared. And I think that you can also lost my train of thought there a little bit. As you practice different kinds of interviews, go on an interview for a company maybe that you don't care about and get some of the jitters out and you know, answer some of those behavioral questions and technical questions, and then, you know, learn from that, like give yourself your own feedback and critique on what you could do better, and then go apply for the job that you actually care about. And so I think that they kind of play into each other. And so ideally you're doing practice as like mock interviews, but if you need to go on a real interview as a practice interview, then go find some company that you don't care about. Best case scenario, they like you and they want to make you an offer. Now you can go take that job offer and dangle it in front of the company you do want to work for and be like, hey, I got this offer in hand, but then I saw the job post for your company and, you know, I love your company. You're aligned with what I want to do. And so, you know, is there any possibility of like getting through the interview process because this offer is going to expire? I'll ask them for an extension because I'd really rather work for you, but is there anything that can happen there? And you'd be surprised what kind of movement you can make at a company by just saying like, hey, I've got an offer, but I'd really rather work for you. Is there something that we can do? I think that a lot of companies are willing to hire good talent. And if you can, you know, reasonably prove to them that you actually have an offer, you're not just making it up. I think that you can, you know, you can use that as leverage where they're going to feel like they're missing out if they don't interview you and hire you because clearly somebody liked you enough to make you an offer. Now you may have to disclose a little bit of information, like maybe who the company is or maybe some detail about the offer, just so they have some expectation of whether they can match the offer or beat it, or even be on like the same sort of playing field as that other offer. But so be willing and ready to do that. You don't have to disclose the entire thing, but you can give them some information about like who the company is that you got that offer from. So go practice an interview with a company that's not as important to you. And if you get an offer, now you've got extra leverage. If not, you've at least practiced the interview to then go interview with the company that you do care about. So either way, it's kind of win-win for that. So hopefully that'll give some ideas there. Cool. I've been going for about an hour and a half. We've had some good questions from chat. I'm happy to just hang out if other people have questions. There's still a handful of viewers online. So I'm happy to just hang out. If you've got questions about interview prep, career prep, let's just do some like live Q&A. If you got questions, drop them in chat. Let me know you're there. You can always make a free Twitch account and drop your questions in there. I'm more than happy to answer questions kind of live as we go and not just the questions that people have submitted. But I'm absolutely happy to kind of hear from folks and see what kinds of questions you've actually got. So I'll give a minute or so just to see if anybody's got some questions there, and then we'll either answer those or we'll wrap up for the night. So again, on Sunday, I got something kind of special cooking for the start of the stream. And then Sunday, I think I've got a handful of resumes to go through. So I'm going to do resume reviews on Sunday. I may do like maybe a couple more questions. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Zoe, thank you for all your tips tonight. You're welcome. Happy to do this. Happy to share my perspective. And like I said, as much as possible, I look forward to having other people on the stream to also share their perspectives. So it's not just me talking all the time. I think it's important to hear other perspectives. So I think one thing I might try to do, I might see if I can find somebody to be on the stream with me on Sunday to do the resume reviews with me. I think that's more fun instead of just hearing my thoughts on what makes a good resume. So let me see if I can arrange for someone to be on the call on Sunday, and we'll do some resume reviews together. So yeah, I think we'll wrap up from there. So thanks for hanging out, everybody. Hope you had a good time. Let's go find somebody to raid. Who can we raid? Who's online? Let's mute all the things. Midnight Simon's on. Midnight Simon's got like a big Fang interview in 7 days, so he's constantly coding all the time, trying to find things to do. Let's see, who can we go raid? Oh, Kirsty was online earlier, but not on now. Let's see. Anybody have any recommendations on who to raid? I've got one person in mind, maybe, that does some live gaming dev that we could maybe go raid. Yeah, I think we'll go raid them. All right, so let's drop this in as a raid. Actually, we'll do that over here. My channel. All right, so we're gonna go raid Sympathy. Cool. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out, everybody. We'll catch you next time. We'll see you on Sunday, same time, 7 p.m. Mountain, which is 6 p.m. Pacific and 9 p.m. Eastern. And we'll see you on Sunday. Have a great weekend. Be safe. Show somebody some gratitude, and we'll chat with you soon.